Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello, I'm Colonie Town Judge Peter Crummey, and welcome to Benchmark. We'll explore a variety of issues involving our justice system, our legal system, and how they intersect with the citizens of the town of Colonie. Today, we are truly fortunate to have one of New York State's most distinguished jurists with us, Appellate Division Supreme Court Justice Bernard J. Malone, Jr. As many of you know, Judge Malone has provided to all of us a lifetime commitment to public service. Judge Malone served our country during the Vietnam War, receiving the Bronze Medal and also the Army Commendation Medal for meritorious service. From there, Judge Malone graduated from our Albany Law School and went to work in the Albany County District Attorney's Office, where his first practice experience was right here in the Colonie Town Justice Court. From there, he entered private practice only to resume public service in the U.S. Attorney's Office, serving the Northern District. There, Judge Malone prosecuted a variety of significant federal felony cases, and from there was appointed subsequently by Governor Pataki in 1998 to serve our Supreme Court. Subsequent to that, he was elected to a full 14-year term and was then assigned to the Appellate Division, first serving in Manhattan, and now, over the past 4 years, serving right here in Albany, New York. And Judge, thank you very much for joining us today. I know your schedule is so full.
Well, Peter, thank you very much for asking me to be here. This is just very humbling, and I'm honored to be asked by you to appear and to talk something about the things that I have done for the viewing of the citizens of Colonie.
Well, Judge, you know, we learned long ago from Judy Garland that there's no place like home, and you started your practice and your prosecutorial skills right here in the Colonie Town Justice Court. Tell us how that got underway, Judge.
Well, that was my second job in Colonie. My first, that I didn't mention to you, was at the end of my first year at Albany Law School. I lived in Pine Hills in Albany. I finished my last exam. I had a two-year-old son, and a 6-month-old son. I needed a summer job, so I drove over to Central Avenue and said, if I turn right before I find a job, I'm going to hit the Hudson River. So I turned left and started knocking on doors. And when I got to what is now Islander Pools, next to the Farmer Boy Diner on Central Avenue, I asked for a job, told them who I was, and they gave me a job. So that was Imperial Pools, Carmen Goody. I had a great summer. I drove a dump truck, worked hard. Another gentleman and I dug the holes for in-ground swimming pools. Best shape I've ever been in. I was in better shape then than I was after infantry OCS at Fort Benning for 6 months. But then went to work at the Albany DA's office after my second year of law school, second of 3, as you know, and fell in love with the criminal law, not locking people up certainly, but just enjoyed it. My father was a lawyer. My older brother is a lawyer. Younger brother's a lawyer now. But I fell in love with the criminal law, so instead of going back to Little Falls in Herkimer County, where they had an office for me when I graduated, I stayed in Albany. Arnie Proskin was the DA, gave me an opportunity, both as a law student and then after I graduated and took the bar exam to be an assistant DA. But my first court experience was here in the town of Colonie. Harry D'Agostino and Frank Tate were the two town judges. As we now know, they're two great individuals, and I was so fortunate to learn from them and to learn how courts actually work here in the town of Colonie Town Court.
Well, it was a great place for you to start, and then, of course, from there you subsequently entered private practice, only to return to public service as a U.S. Assistant District Attorney. And you were involved in a variety of prosecutions there, very serious and nationally known and recognized cases throughout your experience there. And Judge, the nature of the cases that you worked on as an assistant U.S. attorney, what were they, Judge?
Well, mainly criminal cases. Before I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office in 1982, I spent 9 years as a partner at an excellent Albany law firm called Him and Straub, where I spent a lot of time representing the state police, including those who had retaken the Attica prison on September 13th, 1971. Always missed the criminal law. When Fred Scullin became the U.S. Attorney, I asked if there was a position in Albany. He was in Syracuse. There was. So I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Albany, which I still think is perhaps the best law firm in upstate New York. And now that I've been in New York City for a couple of years on the appeals court there, I have concluded that not only is it one of the best law firms in upstate New York, it's one of the best law firms statewide and even nationally. But in the U.S. Attorney's Office, I did mainly criminal prosecutions, drugs, guns. I ended up being the bank robbery guy. I ended up being the child porn prosecutor. I did the first child porn case. The case was brought in by the postal inspectors, and Dave Homer, who's a soon-to-be retired federal magistrate judge here in Albany, and was the supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's Office, asked me if I would take a child porn case, and I said, sure. I said, I'm not sure what it is, but I found out. So that became one of my specialties, if you will. And then I was the bank robbery guy, probably because I had done bank robberies when I was in the Albany DA's office, 10 years earlier. So,
Judge, it was your prowess as a prosecutor in the federal court system on bank robbery cases, which actually led to a nationally known case involving the U.S. versus Robert Jones. And I wonder if you could just share a minute with us on the nature of that case and the breadth of what actually occurred in that matter.
Sure. It was a case that did get some national publicity, mainly involving shows like Missing Persons from Hollywood. And it did not get much publicity in Albany because what took place was in the North Country, in Sable Forks and in Plattsburgh. I was asked sometime around 1990 by an FBI agent who was assigned to Plattsburgh. His name was Art Zerone, who had been a starting fullback for Army once upon a time, if I would come to Sable Forks and go through a bank robbery scenario that had taken place. He said he couldn't come down to Albany to present it. He really needed me to go up. So I did, and we drove from place to place to place, and I became convinced that his prime suspect, Robert Jones, from Sable Forks, had robbed a key bank in Sable Forks, New York, and had probably been assisted by his wife, who blocked a bridge with their old Chevy Suburban with their two kids in that Suburban. So I asked the grand jury here in Albany to issue a subpoena to Mr. Jones to provide a hair sample, photograph, and writing exemplar because the car that he used to rob the bank and to get away, he had stashed in the woods and had abandoned, and there was some evidence in the vehicle. So he came to Albany. He moved to quash the subpoena. That motion in front of Judge Chalakis was denied, and after he provided those things to the grand jury, I sat down with his two attorneys, one from Buffalo, my friend Terry Kenlin, outstanding defense attorney from Albany, and told them that I was convinced that their client had robbed that bank, and that all I needed was one more piece of evidence, in my opinion, to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I said, I have sufficient evidence to seek an indictment, but I'm going to wait to see if more evidence surfaces. And about a year later, when we had a meeting, this FBI from Maine, where he'd been a target of a bank robbery there, and FBI Plattsburgh, State Police from Troop B, Plattsburgh, Raybrook, at my office here in Albany, and it turns out that another key bank in Plattsburgh had been robbed a couple of weeks earlier, and that Jones was a suspect. So we targeted a young man from Maine who was with Jones building a house near Ausable Forks at the time of the Plattsburgh robbery, and was part of Jones's alibi. So the FBI in Maine approached this young man's parents and said, "We want to talk to your son." The parents called the son, who was staying with Jones and his wife and kids in Ausable Forks, said, "The FBI wants to talk to you." Jones answered the phone, Robert Jones answered the phone, and when his friend from boyhood from Maine came home, said, I should, we learned this later, "I should kill you because you are the weak link, but I won't because we've been friends." And the next morning, the young man headed home to Maine, told his parents he was going to take the ferry, so the FBI and state police were at the ferry in Plattsburgh and stopped Jones, stopped the other young man whose name I can't remember. And after an hour of denying everything, he said, "If you'll protect me, I will tell you everything," and said, yes, not only did Jones tell me he robbed the bank at Ausable Forks with help from his wife, but not only did he and I rob the bank in Plattsburgh about a month ago, but we also robbed a key bank in Waterville, Maine, a few months ago, at which Jones was shooting at a Colby College police car that was chasing them after the bank robbery. And the young man also said that as Jones went in to rob the key bank in Waterville, that a young woman came out of that bank, went to her car, and that Jones chased her. And the young man told Jones, leave her alone, get in the bank, and we have to get out of here." So later the young man said that he asked Jones, "What were you going to do with that woman?" He said, "Oh, I was going to rape her and kill her." And so I sought an indictment from the federal grand jury here in Albany and obtained one for Jones robbing the Ausable Bank, the Waterville Maine Bank, and the Plattsburgh Bank. In Plattsburgh, the young man said Jones had planned to rob the bank, take all right turns to get onto the Northway so they wouldn't have to run a red light to be noticed and stopped. Went down a couple of quick exits in Plattsburgh on the Northway, got off, and switched cars again with Jones's wife and two kids, listening all the time on a police scanner. So in time, we thought that maybe Jones had done something else very bad. And so we made a plea agreement with Jones's wife through her attorney, who was from Vermont, that if Robert Jones, her husband, would tell her something bad that he had done, that I would recommend to the federal judge that if she pled guilty to helping him with two bank robberies, she'd not go to jail. She could stay home with her two young children. And so the federal marshals took Robert Jones from down the street here at the Albany County Jail to the State Police Barracks in Wilton. And the police brought his wife down from Peru near Plattsburgh, and we put them in a room, and he told her that in 1987, so it'll be 25 years this June, he had abducted a 16-year-old girl from the streets of Sable Forks. Her name was Carrie Lynn Nixon, and I'd forgotten the spelling. I went to your library downstairs.
Sure.
And put the name in, and sure enough, it came up. Her name was Carrie Lynn Nixon, K-A-R-I-L-Y-N-N, Nixon. She had gone missing in June of 1987. No trace. Police had gone to California, missing persons. In any event, he said that he had abducted her at gunpoint from the streets of Sable Forks as she walked home from a convenience store, took her to a cabin in his car, talked with her. She wanted to go home, told her that they had to have sex. So he said he raped her, was taking her home down a path that she said there was no log across the path when we came here, so he strangled her and dropped her, went to the ground, could still hear a heartbeat. He shot her in the heart, what he thought was the heart. Listened again, no more heartbeat. So we covered her body up with brush, went home. Next morning he came and he moved the body some yards away and buried her. And he said that every summer after that he would go to see if the animals had dug up the body, and they had not. So after he confessed to his wife, which was watched by the state police and the FBI. They took a team from the State Police Forensic Lab here in Albany, Dr. Lowell Levine, Dr. Michael Baden, and they took Jones, and the next morning he showed them where the cabin was, where he had raped her and had since burned down for the insurance money. Took a walk, said, "This is where I strangled and shot her," and walked further, looked around and said, "Okay, this is where her head is, and this is where her feet are." So they removed 3 feet of snow. It was January, and dug and recovered the body. And that night, Michael Baden called me and said, "Have you ever watched an autopsy?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you want to?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, I want you to come to Albany Med tomorrow morning, and going to autopsy the body that's encased in dirt and mud and roots," which I did. I then went to the funeral in Sable Forks a couple of days later. My wife said, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "I have to put closure to this. I have to get on." Not that I hadn't been doing a lot of other cases, but
That's right.
so I drove to Sable. I went to walked into the church, went up and sat with the FBI and state police across the aisle from the family. Was there for the Mass, and at the end of the Mass, I walked out the side door and got in my car and came home, and that was the end of it. When I went downstairs here and put the name in the computer, I saw that he did have his first parole hearing last September, and it was denied. So any people who are interested, if they just Google Carrie Lynn Nixon, K-A-R-I-L-Y-N-N Nixon, and they will see a whole screen of choices, including the denial of his first parole hearing last September. So that was a very, very profound case for me.
Well, it certainly is, Judge, and of course, your prowess in the prosecution of that matter, it took a tragic event and at least made sure that justice was served to the extent that it could be at that time. And it's certainly a riveting fact pattern, which certainly can help guide all of us in a moment, and feel for that family as well that suffered such a tremendous loss. From there, Judge, too, a variety of other cases, and I know you were involved in some death penalty cases out in the Binghamton area as well. But you continued your service there, and ultimately you were asked by the then governor of the state of New York in 1998 to serve as a Supreme Court justice, and then soon thereafter elected to a full 14-year term as well. And since certainly for 6 or 8 years, you've been serving on the Appellate Division. And I know that that's there's two different types of practice for a judge. As a Supreme Court justice, you're a trial level judge. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then when you're asked to serve on the Appellate Division, how does your life change, or how does your day-to-day change?
Well, as a trial judge, I presided over, and for the most part was able to settle a great majority of cases, from divorce cases to auto accidents to labor law accidents. But then I was asked to go to the Appellate Division in Manhattan. There were 4 Appellate Divisions in the state: Manhattan, Brooklyn, Albany, and Rochester. And Appellate Divisions sit as 5-judge courts, and we hear appeals from county courts, surrogates courts, and family courts, as well as Supreme Court.
Right.
And so I took the train down and up about 3 days a week from Manhattan, and to my surprise, there are several dozen people who do that every day. Every day they do it. I did it about 3 days a week, and enjoyed it immensely. New York City, and therefore the appeals to the Appellate Division, deal in large part with huge international commercial cases, because many international contracts say that if there is a dispute, they will be governed by the laws of the state of New York, and the venue will be in New York City.
Wow.
So I did that for about 2.5 years, and then had the chance to come home here to Albany. In 2008, I was transferred here to Albany, where I serve with a wonderful family of people. We have 11 judges. We had 12. We just lost our wonderful presiding justice, Anthony Cardona, who died of cancer late last year, and we miss him terribly. But I enjoy very much hearing appeals here in Albany. As I said, there are 11 of us now. We sit 5 at a time, so I never sit with the same judges on consecutive session days. And right now, it happens that my 14-year term, to which I was elected in 1998, is up. So I am running now for re-election.
Well, we wish you the best in that regard. Judge, I haven't practiced in front of the Appellate Division in quite some time. In fact, the last case I did, I was a town attorney here and representing the town in connection with a matter. What's the process like for the Appellate Division? As an attorney, I know what the courtroom scenario is, but outside of the courtroom, do the Appellate Division judges meet and conference every case, or is one judge assigned to be a lead judge? How's the process work?
Each judge is assigned about 3 weeks before the appeal is argued to be the judge assigned to write a proposed decision. And the lawyers and the public are not told that. The attorneys and the public, by visiting our website, can see about 3 weeks before the case is scheduled to be heard who the 5 judges are going to be for whatever that is worth.
Right.
And then the attorneys appear, and each day we hear about 10 arguments, and each side gets about 10 minutes. And an attorney never, ever gets to stand there for 10 minutes and recite or read an argument.
Right.
We basically are waiting to ask questions. So we allow the attorney to introduce himself or herself and perhaps say a few things, but then we'll say,
remember.
Yes, there's, and it's very congenial.
Yes.
It's very conversational. When I was in the first department, that's very different. It's a huge courtroom, very palatial. The judges sit way up high and look down at the attorneys who are arguing. In Albany, it's very, very nice for the attorneys and the judges, and we, the judges, ask questions of the attorneys for most of their 10 minutes, and they're not held exactly to 10 minutes, but it's a sufficient amount of time for us to ask questions and get answers about what each of us thinks is the real important question on this particular case. And then we do conference after we sit and talk about the cases.
Sure.
We then go back to our chambers with our wonderful law clerks, Erica Bergen is mine, and I'm so blessed to have her. And she and I research and write and circulate proposed decisions to the other 4 judges for each panel that I sat in. And then every month, all of us get together and discuss and decide as many of those cases as we can. So the general wait after we hear an appeal for a decision is 6 to 8 weeks. It's not long.
How many appeals will come before your department in a year? Is there an average number, or it varies dramatically?
The third department hears approximately 2,500 appeals per year.
All right. Now, if some of those cases are then appealed, they end up in our Court of Appeals, right?
Yes,
probably very few, but
yes, above the 4 appellate divisions, where, as I said, we sit 5 at a time, there is one Court of Appeals, which is in Albany. It's next to City Hall on one side and next to my Albany County Courthouse on the other side. And there are 7 judges there, and they sit together, all 7, every time, and they hear approximately 200 appeals. Hear and decide approximately 200 appeals per year.
Well, Judge, you're not only involved in serving us in your capacity as a Supreme Court Justice in the Appellate Division, but you give your time so freely to the advancement and enhancement of law itself. One of the other things that you've done that touched the town of Colonie, of course, which we're also proud of here in the town of Colonie, is our Colonie Youth Court. And it is now, of course, a model for the rest of the nation on how youth courts can work so successfully. And you were one of the founders of the Colonie Youth Court while you were serving through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and you were assigned to help get it underway here. And of course, it's a success story today. And your involvement there and your involvement in the enhancement of law has led you to a committee, a New York State Bar Association committee, special committee on youth courts, and that is chaired by our former Chief Justice, Judge Judith Kaye. And you and I were together just 2 days ago in her law office on a meeting that we have every quarter, it appears to me. And she values your judgment so very much in these matters. And I thought that many of our opportunities to speak with Judge Kaye and work with her have certainly been very interesting and moving for all of us around that table.
Yes, I'd like to say, first of all, Peter, you are now and have been for several years one of the leaders and movers of the Colonie Justice Court. It was about Youth Court, I'm sorry. It was about 20 years ago that we in the U.S. Attorney's Office, being instructed by the Department of Justice in Washington, to try to start one or more youth courts. And it just turns out that Bill Parachek, an assistant U.S. attorney, lives probably a quarter of a mile from the library here, and decided that Colonie would be a good spot to try to do something. And so with Bill's leadership, he still runs the youth court here. Colonie became not only hugely successful, but is a model of youth courts for the thousands of youth courts that now exist across the country. And President Bush's wife actually attended a Colonie youth court session. And based upon Colonie, we then formed a now successful youth court in the town of Bethlehem, because I happen to live with my wife and kids in Delmar. And because of your involvement and because of my involvement, you and I were about 20 people all across the state, because there are youth courts throughout the state, who were selected by Chief Judge Judith Kaye to be on a state bar committee. And as you said 2 days ago, and we do this, about 3 times a year?
That's right.
We meet at Judith Kaye's law firm in New York City, Skadden Arps, which is a huge international white shoe law firm. And Judge Kaye is, I know, thrilled to have us down there. I know that she had to retire at age 70 as chief judge, and she misses that dearly. She was a good neighbor, certainly of mine at the Court of Appeals next to my chambers at the county courthouse. But Colonie is at the head nationally of youth courts, and there is another push nationally and in the state with the pushing of Judith Kaye and the State Bar Association to create more youth courts in New York.
Well, and it's certainly due to your good efforts there, and you're also, of course, involved in giving your time to our own Albany Law School. You and I both graduated from there. I have a daughter there now, and you've been on that board of trustees for probably 12 years, and we're very lucky to have your insight and wisdom shared there as we continue to maintain and enhance a very special institution in the Capital Region, unique, one of a kind, and has trained so many for the practice of law, and so many fabulous judges like yourself.
Well, I'm one of those people who who believes in giving back, and I've been able to do that over the years, little by little. I was active in the Albany Law School Alumni Association, eventually became the national president of the Albany Law School Alumni Association, and then when that term was up, I moved on to the Board of Trustees, where I continued to serve as now one of the more seasoned members, helping to steer what you and I know is a wonderful educational institution.
Well, Judge, we were so lucky to have you today. Of course, our time together cannot do justice to the significant and dramatic commitment that you've made to public service throughout your career, and we look forward to you continuing in that way on behalf of all of us, including and especially the citizens of the town of Colonie.
Oh, I love the town of Colonie.
Well,
I just got this bump on my head by installing a dryer that we purchased sales tax to Colonie at Sears a couple of weeks ago. So thank you very much, Peter.
Judge, thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, Peter, thank you.
I'm Colonie Town Judge Peter Crummey, and thank you for joining me on Benchmark.